deepest and engrossing matter now on BBC Learning Zone. So how is life in an electronic fantasy world likely to affect child development?
It is Tim and Sally and a clown.
Since the 1960s, there have been dramatic changes in the electronic media that children have learned to use inside and outside school. As these technologies have become more complex, they have come to play an ever-increasing part in children's lives, raising questions about their impact on social and intellectual development. Are they encouraging a generation of social isolates? Do they have the potential to change the way children think? And what contribution is psychology making to our understanding of the effects of these new media?
I like it better than watching cartoons because well, you can control the characters and it's just like you making your own cartoon up with the characters. I think it makes you feel good that you're doing well on something. And also on Echo the Dolphin, it's not really getting the scores. Rescuing dolphins and rescuing your friends, and you know, it makes you feel happy.
It's got a girl in it as well called Channel A, and that's why most girls play her especially. And also in this game they've made her one of the best players. They made her faster than all of the others. They've made her have special moves which are better.
Children's engagement in new technology poses a challenge to adults. The temptation is either to dismiss it as trivial or to worry about its compulsive appeal.
If they were doing something simple, repetitive all the time, then they get very quickly bored. It's because it offers them a whole range of possibilities that they enjoy what they think is the fantasy of it, because it's all about power and control and being in control, which of course if you're a child is the one thing you long to be.
I find it quite interesting that when children become very devoted to activities such as chess or reading or whatever, parents and teachers tend to praise them, but somehow there is a suspicion about new technology which has gone on from generation to generation. The telephone was supposed to make you go deaf. Travelling at more than 20 miles an hour in a train was supposed to make the human body disintegrate.
I was born in a house with a television always on. Guess I grew up too fast.
I think there's moral panic about anything that people don't understand well. The same moral panic, the same things were actually said about television in the 1950s. And many, many research projects were initiated then to look at exactly the same things. Is it going to create a nation of recluses who don't interact, who don't play with each other, who don't talk to each other?
Children are making alternative worlds all the time. That's what they do when they tell stories. In some ways, what I see in the new technology are new folk tales, which are shared because they do share the same video games, the same video tracks. What people worry about is in case they lose themselves in a world and stop having contact with what they call reality. I think that's unlikely for the normal child.
Contrary to the public myths, I actually found that children who were the more introverted type who actually went into new technology, playing computer games or programming, whatever, actually increased their social circles. They now had street credibility. People came to them for advice. How do I get to the next level on this game or whatever? Many children are still very suspicious of new technology, so they acted as gurus to these children.
Concerns about the social effects of the new technologies go hand in hand with concerns about their effects on children's intellectual development. For instance, the concern about the time taken up that could be spent on reading. The speed of technological change also means that each new generation of children is faced with dramatically different experiences to those of their parents and teachers.
I often think that in schools at the moment we have the Andy Pandy generation leading the MTV generation forward, and it's illustrative, I think, to look back on Andy Pandy and look at the way that those programs were. The pace is astonishingly slow when you show them. It takes 20 seconds for the flower to open at the beginning of the program. You get the credits, then you get a narrative tune, then you get an introduction. You only get one thing at a time. It's got no pace to it at all, and yet in the context that maybe we'll listen to it, which is often in a darkened room with the curtains drawn and a small screen in the corner, it was appropriate, and it was the single focus of our attention.
Here today.
Andy Pandy's playing somewhere very special today. Let's go and find him, shall we? There he is. Hello, Andy Pandy.
What we find now are children who can be comfortable with a much, much busier screen. You watch pop videos, if you watch current advertisements, you'll find often 20-second advertisements with 25 or more video edits clipped into their brevity. You'll find story, narrative, character, plot and place packed into 10 seconds of an advertisement. And children are adept at handling that. And remember that the television is now in a bright and illuminated room and is only a tiny window in a much bigger social context. So I think children have become much more efficient information handlers. Whether they're learning more from that, more comfortable handling of information, I think is a very big question. And it's a question that desperately needs better and higher quality and long-term research.
How children learn from technology has been most fully explored in the world of education. Each generation of school children has come to terms with new uses for technology that have been shaped by the prevailing theory of learning and development. In the early 60s, it was behaviorism and the teaching machine, promoted by B.F. Skinner, one of the most famous psychologists of the period.
Professor Skinner found that by using a special procedure, he could teach pigeons and rats quite complex sequences of behavior. Here, the pigeon is first trained to approach the food bin when he hears a click and sees a light come on inside the tray. The food is then available for 2.5 seconds. He learns this very quickly, and the light and click are then established as the signals to come and eat.
Machines are patient and reliable. The same fixed procedures can be repeated again and again until the animal has learned them. Applying the same techniques to children says something about the way we think they learn and make sense of the world around them.
It is Tim and Sally and the car.
Skinner's main approach to psychology as a science was to reject concepts of mind, so that we couldn't talk about thoughts, couldn't talk about feelings, we couldn't talk about imagination, and so on. So it was natural for Skinner to look at the teaching machine as a way of delivering perfect instruction to young children.
The dog barks.
As the designer of the system, you could set up the stimuli, you could fix the reinforcement schedules, you could monitor responses and decide when a response was established so that you could go on to the next step.
The dog barks at the car.
There is no reason why a boy should solve an equation to gain approval. That isn't why mathematicians solve equations. There's no reason why the child should solve them for that reason. You solve an equation in order to go on and do something else. And that's exactly what happens with a well-prepared program. You are progressing, you're moving, you have a sense that you're accomplishing something. This is all done for kinds of reinforcers which do not involve personal contact. I'm all for getting the personal touch out of mathematics, because it shouldn't be there. Nothing about mathematics that involves the personal touch.
I've always felt the problem with the behaviorist approach to learning is not that it's simply wrong, it's just that it's a very impoverished kind of language for talking about learning. And the key ingredients to that language were reinforcement. And there is a basic insight there. It is useful often to attend to the consequences of what people do if you want to understand what they're going to do in the future or what they might have learned. So that's not a bad idea, but it doesn't take it very far.
Study after study, investigation after investigation, produced evidence which was counter to these theoretical claims. So that, for example, it soon became evident that there are individual differences in, if you like, learning styles, that some children don't want to go through small-step fixed sequences. Some children sometimes want to test a hypothesis which takes them several steps ahead. Some children like to work from the general and go to the particular. Others like to work from the particular to the general. So I think behaviorism gave way to cognitive psychology, to the widespread realization that unless we could have some theory about what the mental processes are which underlie these individual differences, then there's no way in which we could facilitate the learning process.
A baby of the computer age. By typing any 4 keys, the horse appears. For her, it's a plaything, but her education and development will be transformed by it. Will she be programmer or programmed?
20 years on from the teaching machine came perhaps the most radical vision of how technology could support children's intellectual development. Seymour Pappett's work with the programming language Logo. Using the language, children could maneuver a device called a turtle to explore mathematical and geometrical concepts.
The computer offers us a chance to reorganize the way we learn. Instead of being given knowledge by a hierarchy of experts, we can get it for ourselves, building it from scratch with the computer as our workbench. Here, the turtle is an arrowhead.
There's the arrow, you can see it. It's there. And that's where the turtle is. Yeah. We call it Seymour clearly. We named it after a person that invented Logo, and he was Seymour Papert.
I tend more and more to avoid that word education. It makes one think of doing something to the child, educating the child. The most important parts are in relationship, in play, in social forms, in art, in sensibility to aesthetics. All this is part of the developing individual, and the computer enters into all of that.
Well, if Skinner's work with teaching machines illustrates behaviorism, then Pappert's work with these micro-worlds like Logo are a very vivid demonstration of how Piaget's psychology can be translated into educational practice. And the important thing for us to do is to provide resources and an environment and a setting in which they can, by their own activity, discover the things that they need to know. And so the Logo micro-world was a vehicle of this sort. I mean, it was a tool with which children could explore mathematical ideas and do so from a base of their own interest and their own engagement and their own curiosity.
Objects whizzing around the screen give this generation of children experience never before available. Children learn by experience of the world around them. That was the message of the Swiss educationist Jean Piaget. And hearing it, schools brought everyday objects into the classroom, creating a revolution in the education of young children. Crayon, glue, cardboard, blocks. These are the standard building materials from which children build their minds. Papert worked with Piaget and realized that the computer should come in along with the mud pies.
Education has very little to do with explanation. It has to do with engagement, with falling in love with the material.
By getting to know these turtles as they get to know a person, these children are learning to be mathematicians. This is Piaget's real message, learning rooted in experience.
But research hasn't borne out Pappert's claims. For Logo to be effective, an adult needs to be on hand to guide children's encounters with the program and to help them interpret what they're finding out.
You've got to, for me, draw a distinction between 2 aspects of Piagetian theory. One is the idea of construction of knowledge through practical activity. I think that's still a very, very powerful notion, and I think few of us would want to reject this image of the child as being active, constructive, and so on. But where we take objection to Piagetian theory is the very anemic role that he portrays for society, for culture, for social interaction, for teachers, for parents. That many of us think that, that it's inconceivable that a culture can reproduce itself by leaving its children to play or even to work with these sophisticated electronic media.
Is the turtle and its computer a real hope for the future? Will a generation of kids grow up with new ways of thinking? Will the social experience of programming, with all its sense of achievement, introduce a new model for education? A system without schools as we know them, where the institutions of learning are lively, rhythmic places, where novices and experts, jugglers and mathematicians, clowns and physicists get together.
History can appear cruel to new technology and to its enthusiasts. Innovations rapidly date and become relics. But the intentions of their designers and the experiences of their users reveal a more complex history than just a string of one-off inventions. The history of the computer is the evolution of a cultural tool.
The idea is that when we look at mundane tools, literal tools, that what we should see theoretically is not simply a bit of technology, but an externalization of human reasoning. So that, for example, to understand how to use a very mundane tool like a screwdriver clearly requires some exposure to that tool in use and to the sorts of purposes and functions that it can serve in practical activities. And the activity theory, the cultural tool theory, is that all technology is like this, that all cultural artifacts are like this. The means whereby cultural transmission of everyday skills takes place, so that they're invitations, as it were, to recapitulate culture through learning.
2,000 years ago, writing was a new technology. It's now seen as a universal good, but its origins saw similar concerns about what it might be good for and the effects it might have on the culture.
Socrates was worried about writing because it was so permanent. It was the very thing that it's good for that worried him. And he thought that if writing took over from discussion, then only one point of view would emerge. He liked the idea that people would be able to contradict each other, and he thought that truth would disappear because there would be only one version of it.
Present-day concerns, too, have tended to highlight the effects of the new media on the individual. But research hasn't shown either the threatened ill effects or the promised benefits to be as universal as some have claimed. In fact, it's the social activity that the new technology supports that's proving to be one of its most significant legacies.
Right, except for the memory. You've got a lot of We've come here to look at children and their learning with computer games, because computer games have been one of the most contentious areas. People have been most critical of children with computer games, and we've looked and we've surprised ourselves by what we've found. For example, we found good collaborative dialogue, we've found collaborative endeavour, we've found delight, we've found children's face lighting up by the pleasure that they've gained from solving a problem. And that problem solving, I think, is at the heart of the most exciting of what we think we're seeing with children using computer games. They've got a shared problem and a shared task and a shared dialogue.
Children who are working around computers are often being asked to work with abstract ideas, but they're being given a technology that makes those abstract ideas in some sense accessible and tangible. And it's also giving them a technology that allows them to be fairly actively engaged with that material so that they can interact with it and manipulate it and experiment with it. Now, when you've got that kind of combination, you've created for the pupils a setting in which they have a lot of shared knowledge.
It's less clear what other long-term effects of the new technology are likely to be. Children quickly adapt to the new possibilities created by the technology. For adults, it's often harder to come to terms with these changes.
Most of us of our generation are reasonably good at thinking in 2 dimensions spatially, but add a 3rd dimension and make it move. And most of us are thinking collapses. Now, new technology provides the means to produce this dynamic imagery through time. What, I wonder, is going to be the effect on children's thinking when they've had a couple of generations, as it were, of exposure to these sorts of dynamic representations. But how will that enter into their metaphors of thinking, into the analogies that they draw from thinking? It seems to me there is a possibility that there could be some reasonably exciting effects on children's intellectual competences.
One attitude that I always want to insist on when children are learning to read is that they should discover that it's something you have to persevere with. You know, not give it up. The notion that impressions will stand in for thinking
Selected.
makes me slightly worried, because thinking is something which needs to move more slowly. You have to become the teller and the told. You have to tell yourself instead of simply looking at what other people are telling you. You have, in a sense, to take over the intellectual process and move from just understanding things because you've seen a lot of them to those things which, in a sense, language does better than pictures.
Drawing parallels with literacy is one way of making sense of the possible impact of new technology. It reminds us that access to these new media is access to power.
The extent to which there's literary activity in the home is probably the strongest predictor of children's progress in reading and attainment in reading in schools. And I see no reason to suppose that there's going to be any difference in relation to new technology. So to the extent that, as this technology is absorbed into the culture, to the extent that that absorption is selective with respect to either economic means or with respect to gender, for example, then yes, it will certainly, if not perpetuate, exacerbate these inequalities and individual differences.
To tell ourselves that literacy is a wholly democratic thing really is to skip the real issue about it. It's a very selective process. Now, I have an idea that this could be the same with new technology literacy, because those who make it are the ones who decide whose vision of the world goes in and what children and other people use it for. It is as much a form of control as it is a form of choice and freedom.
Like print literacy, the new media are powerful applications of technology to communication and human expression. They offer new ways to convey the preoccupations and aspirations of our culture. But our understandings of the effects of technology on children's intellectual and social development are tentative. Psychology has made it clear that we shouldn't look simply at the technology and generalize about its power. We need to look at the complex activity that it supports and at the ways it is being absorbed into our culture.
The computer's a cultural tool. Well, I think we can only crystal ball gaze at the moment. I mean, it's not, although it's becoming embedded in our culture, it's not deeply embedded in our culture. So that, for instance, many teachers who are working with children with educational technology have very little experience and no intuitions. So this is a new tool which is having a revolutionary effect within a culture, and for which we've not yet got any cultural practices. We're inventing cultural practices on the fly. One of the jobs of psychology, I think, is to say, what is going to be the longer-term effects of new information technology on human relationships, human cognition, human communication? And I'm sure we can all speculate wildly about what those effects are going to be.